Imagine a world so confident it carves lions into the stone gateways of its cities, a world of kings and scribes, of palaces decorated with vibrant paintings of mythical beasts and solemn processions. For 3 centuries, this world hummed with industry, its ships crossing the sea laden with copper, tin, and ivory, its storerooms meticulously catalogued on thousands of clay tablets. It felt permanent. And then, within a single generation, it all went quiet. The writing stopped. The great tombs were sealed for the last time. Even the word for king vanished from the Greek language. This is the story of how a civilization at its peak lost its memory, how its palaces burned, and how its people learned to live in the silence that followed. In the 13th century before the Common Era, to approach a Mycenaean citadel was to be deliberately intimidated. At Mycenae, the walls are a declaration of raw power, built from limestone blocks so colossal that later Greeks believed only the mythical Cyclopes could have moved them. In places they are over 5 meters thick. You pass beneath the Lion Gate, a monumental relief of 2 lionesses flanking a column, a permanent billboard in stone that announces, "You are entering the realm of a Wanax, a king." Walk the lower slopes at Tiryns, and you feel the same oppressive weight in the air. Massive ramparts enclose long, vaulted passages called casemates, stone corridors buried deep inside the walls, masterpieces of military engineering designed to withstand any siege. Inside, this was not a world of rustic warlords. At Pylos, the Palace of Nestor was a vibrant administrative and ceremonial center. At its heart lay the Megaron, the great hall where the Wanax held court. Picture a vast room, its floor plastered and painted with geometric patterns and stylized octopuses. A huge circular hearth dominated the center, its smoke rising past 4 towering columns to a vent in the roof. The walls glowed with frescoes, warriors in boar's tusk helmets, grand feasts, griffins and lions guarding the throne. This was a space for projecting power, for binding followers through gift-giving and ceremony. But behind the grandeur, the palace was an engine of calculation. Its storerooms were filled with giant pithoi, clay jars tall as a man, holding olive oil, wine, and grain. And in quiet, dusty rooms nearby, scribes sat with damp clay, pressing a sharp stylus to create neat rows of symbols. This script, Linear B, was an early form of Greek, but it wasn't for poetry or letters. It was for business. The thousands of tablets that survived were never meant to. They were ephemeral records, lists of flock sizes, allocations of bronze to smiths, inventories of chariot wheels, recipes for perfumed oil, and offerings due to the gods. Poseidon, Hera, Zeus, their names are all there, centuries before the Odyssey. The palace knew everything. It was a centralized, data-driven machine, a paper trail made of mud that managed a whole kingdom's economy from a single building. This control over labor and resources produced wonders. Near Mycenae, sunk into a hillside, is a monumental tomb later called the Treasury of Atreus. Built around 1250 BCE, you enter through a long, stone-lined passage that leads to a doorway over 10 meters high. Inside, you are in a beehive-shaped chamber, a tholos, whose corbelled dome soars 13.5 meters overhead, perfectly formed from 33 rings of cut stone. For over 1,000 years, it was the largest unsupported dome in the world. This was not a humble burial, it was a statement, a man-made mountain for a dead king, a testament to an age of engineers, accountants, and absolute rulers. The Mycenaean palaces were not isolated fortresses. They were powerful, connected players in a vibrant international world. The proof lies at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. Off the coast of Uluburun in modern-day Turkey lies the wreck of a ship that sank in the late 14th century BCE. Its cargo was staggering: 10 tons of copper ingots from Cyprus, a ton of tin likely from Afghanistan, Canaanite jars filled with resin, raw glass ingots from Mesopotamia, logs of African blackwood from Egypt, elephant and hippopotamus ivory, Baltic amber, even a golden scarab bearing the name of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti, and scattered amongst it all, Mycenaean pottery. This single ship was a floating microcosm of the late Bronze Age economy, a web of trust, trade, and diplomacy that linked empires. We also have written proof from their neighbors. Far to the east, in the Hittite capital of Hattusa, royal scribes kept records of foreign affairs. In their letters, they speak of a great kingdom to the west they call Ahhiyawa. Most scholars today are convinced this was their name for the Mycenaean world, the land of the Achaeans. They also mention a city in western Anatolia called Wilusa, a name that aligns almost perfectly with Wilios, the ancient Greek name for Troy. These aren't myths. They are diplomatic cables detailing border disputes, refugee crises, and political maneuvering between great powers. The world of Agamemnon and the world of the Hittite great king were one and the same. But in the final decades of the 13th century, this stable, interconnected world begins to shudder. The earth itself seems to turn against the Mycenaeans. Geological surveys show evidence of a period of intense seismic activity. An earthquake storm that damaged walls and toppled buildings across the region. At Mycenae and Tiryns, you can see the hasty repairs, the cracks plastered over. Fear begins to creep into their architecture. The confident, outward-facing palaces turn inward. They build new, heavier fortifications. At Mycenae, in a remarkable feat of engineering, they construct a secret underground passage, a stone staircase that descends deep into the rock to a hidden cistern, ensuring a water supply during a long siege. A people who once projected power across the sea were now worried about survival at home. And there was something to fear on the sea. Across the eastern Mediterranean, inscriptions in Egypt and letters from Ugarit speak of unrest, of displaced peoples and coastal raiding. This is the era of the so-called Sea Peoples. It wasn't a single pirate navy, but a symptom of widespread disruption, drought, famine, and political instability sending groups of people on the move. We can feel the anxiety in the very last documents from the Palace of Nestor at Pylos. One set of tablets, fired in the final blaze, lists groups of men, coast watchers, stationed at points all along the Mycenaean shore. It's a coastal alarm system, tracked in clay. Other tablets record emergency requisitions, a sudden demand for bronze to be allocated to smiths for weapons. The palace bureaucracy, which for centuries tracked wool and wine, was now tracking an existential threat. This is the great paradox of the Mycenaean world. Its strength was its weakness. The system was a pyramid, highly centralized, specialized, and efficient, but it was brittle. The palace controlled everything: food production, raw materials, luxury goods, craft production. When one part of the system broke, if a drought crippled the harvest, or if a wrecked ship meant the tin for bronze never arrived, or if raiders disrupted a key port, the entire pyramid could begin to crumble. This wasn't just one disaster, but a cascade failure. Earthquakes, climate change, internal unrest, and external threats all pulled on the same fraying threads until the whole tapestry unraveled. The end came with fire. Sometime around 1180 BCE, the Palace of Nestor at Pylos was violently destroyed. The frescoes were blackened and shattered. The great wooden columns of the Megaron collapsed in a shower of sparks. The oil in the storerooms would have fed an inferno, its smoke visible for miles. And in that fire, the last frantic records of the scribes were accidentally baked hard, turning the palace's death certificate into its only surviving library. One by one the other centers fell. Thebes, Gla, Tiryns, all show signs of destruction. Even mighty Mycenae, with its giant walls, saw its citadel burned. Across the Aegean, on the hill of Hisarlik, the city we call Troy VIIa was also destroyed by warfare in the same period. The whole neighborhood was on fire. When the palaces burned, more than buildings were lost. The entire operating system of the civilization was erased. Since Linear B was a specialist tool used only by the palace bureaucracy, the knowledge of writing vanished almost overnight. There were no books, no schools, no public inscriptions to keep it alive. The expertise to organize large-scale labor for building tombs and walls dissolved. The complex web of international trade collapsed. The very title of the king, Wanax, disappears. After the collapse, a much humbler word rises to prominence, basileus, which originally meant something closer to a local chief. The fall of palaces can be heard in the vocabulary itself, a linguistic echo of a world turned upside down. The centuries that followed, from roughly 1100 to 800 BCE, have been called the Greek Dark Age. It wasn't an age without people, but an age without the structures that leave a bold mark on history. Populations shrank and scattered, moving to smaller, more isolated villages, often in easily defensible hilltop locations. Grand architecture ceased. The dead were buried in simple, stone-lined graves, not monumental tholoi. Pottery became simpler, decorated with stark, geometric patterns instead of lively octopuses and chariots. Life became more local. But memory survived. It survived in stories told around the fire, in epic songs passed down from one generation of bards to the next. These songs kept alive the names of great cities and old heroes. Centuries later, when these tales were finally written down as the Iliad and the Odyssey, they contained strange, archaic details that the poets themselves no longer understood. Homer describes his heroes wearing helmets made of boar's tusks. For a long time, this was thought to be a poetic fantasy, but archaeologists have found these exact helmets in Mycenaean graves. The oral tradition had preserved a perfect 3,000-year-old memory of Bronze Age military gear, and the darkness was not total. At Lefkandi, on the island of Euboea, archaeologists uncovered the burial of a 10th-century chief. He was buried in a huge timber building, 100 feet long, with his wife and 4 sacrificed horses. His grave contained fine gold work and imports from Egypt and the Levant. Even in the darkest times, sparks of wealth, power, and connection to the wider world remained. Today, you can still walk through the ruins of this lost world. You can stand beneath the Lion Gate at Mycenae and touch the cool, massive stones that have stood for over 3 millennia. You can step inside the Treasury of Atreus and feel the silence under its perfect dome. The Mycenaeans themselves are gone, but their ambition and engineering remain, etched into the landscape. In the climate-controlled quiet of a museum, you can see their other legacy, the small, hardened pieces of clay. The voices of the last scribes, speaking of bronze, of coast watchers, of offerings to gods, their words preserved by the very fires that destroyed them. The Mycenaeans did not simply vanish. Their system did. When the palaces died, the specialized knowledge they held, how to write, how to build on a colossal scale, how to manage an international economy, died with them. Out of the ruins, a different Greece slowly learned to speak again, not by reviving the old script, but by borrowing a new one from Phoenician traders. This new alphabet, with its revolutionary vowels, would be used to write down the old stories, to formulate philosophy, and to build a new world. The Mycenaeans were a false dawn. They were the first Greeks to write, but their words led to a dead end. From their ashes, another, more resilient culture would have to begin all over again.